Welcome back. Now, World Population Day is an annual event observed on July 11th every year, which seeks to raise awareness on global population issues. The event was established by the Governing Council of the United Nations Development Programme in 1989. It was inspired by the public interest in 5 Billion Day on July 11th, 1987, the approximate date on which the world's population reached 5 billion people. World Population Day aims to increase people's awareness on various population issues such as the importance of family planning, gender equality, poverty, maternal health, and human rights. Now, joining us to discuss this important day that is being commemorated in Mansa-Luapula province is Nachela Chelwa Kawimbe, who is manager monitoring, evaluation, and implementation science research and acting country representative at the Population Council. Good morning and welcome to the Diamond Breakfast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here with you.
Well, happy to talk into World Population Day. I think just last week was the first time we more discussed on this. But let's speak to more the viewer who is unfamiliar with your work.
Yes.
What is the Population Council's mission in Zambia and globally?
Thank you so much, Vida and Malama. Again, very excited to be here to share and commemorate this very important day. So the Population Council is an international non-governmental organization. We are headquartered in New York, and we've also been in Zambia for quite some time. So for over 70 years, the Population Council has tried to tackle critical health and development challenges to improve lives of human beings. And we have done this by conducting research, and arriving at evidence-based solutions that help to answer these world's problems to improve people's lives. Specifically in Zambia, we've been here since 1994, and our work has largely focused on improving reproductive health choices and access. We've also done work around HIV prevention, but also generally youth empowerment programs, which we're very passionate about as a council.
Okay. That's quite interesting. And, you know, when it comes to populating the world, I know that now many people are comfortable with not having children. They will sleep at night, no nightmares. They're good with it, you know, regardless of what families have to say and so on and so forth. Looking at the fact that you're pushing for people to populate, and you've got a whole section as well that is saying, look, I ain't interested. Are there ways you're also just trying to, you know, encourage people to be able to populate, because it's such an important aspect of a nation's growth, you know, and so on. How are you just tapping into that as well?
I think one way that we like to think about that is ensuring that we do enable people to have those choices, you know. In line with this year's theme for World Population Day, it's really empowering young people to have the families that they want. And so there could be a young person whose desire is not to have children, and we should be able to provide the services and the infrastructure that allows for that decision to be carried through. And there could be a young person who also makes a decision to say, I want to delay childbearing, because what we need to know is that the delay of that first birth is very critical. If we look back at our grandmothers a few years back, you know, at the time they had their children and what their economic contribution looked like, it's very different from what our options are currently right now, because we have had the luxury of being able to delay that first birth. You know, you have been able to not have the baby at 13 and have it at 22, or have the baby at 28, and that has enabled you to contribute effectively to the economy, allowed you to continue with education, but also to get into the labor market. So I think it's really boils down to in what ways are we ensuring that we are meeting the choice requirements of this diverse population with diverse reproductive health needs, I think would be my response to that.
Okay. Now, with the theme this year, it focuses on empowering youth to build families in a fair and hopeful world. How does this align with your work?
So I think it's a very powerful theme in the sense that it really is a call to action for a lot of us. You know, we talk about creating a fair and hopeful world, and fair. You talked about the root basis of World Population Day being around conversations of gender equality, addressing inequalities and injustices, and how are we ensuring that? But specific to what the council does is that again, this year's theme resonates with our strategic plan as a council, in that we want to ensure that young people access the services that they need, that they have. When you get to a health facility, you have the full range of contraceptive commodities, and that you have a provider who's able to provide you those services without free of stigma and as confidentially as possible. I think that we also think that we want to invest in potential, you know, thinking around how do we integrate services? How do we ensure that when a young person comes for a contraceptive method, we're also talking to them about HIV prevention and STI prevention, and what are the mechanisms that we can do that. And we have done research to show how do we ensure that young people access this critical information. But it's also about tackling barriers. We understand that gender-based violence remains an issue. We know that also child marriage continues to affect young people in this country. And we know that child marriage and adolescent pregnancy are interlinked. So if you fall pregnant as an adolescent, you're likely to end up in a child marriage. If you do end up in a child marriage, you're likely to have a child very early. And we know the physiological effects and impacts of having a child very early for a young girl. Yeah.
And what strategies then are you also looking into that feeds or that closes that gap? Because we can't deny that, like you're saying, there is stigma also out there. There's, you know, and this, again, because of that stigma, we get to see a lot of young people using backdoor methods, going for illegal abortions, if, you know, possible. They are not looking, they're buying these over-the-counter contraceptives without even truly understanding what that is about. So how are you looking also just to create an environment where communication can flow, young people are free enough also to enter these health facilities? Because I think I remember a couple of times, if there's one thing that has stood out is, you know, in as much as you do have a healthcare worker, there are some care workers that, you know, have their own beliefs, and those beliefs do take over, you know, them within that professional space, which shies away again these young people from, you know, accessing the much needed information or tools that they need. So how are you also challenging that? I know you mentioned something about research.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we do. It's big ideas like yours that we try to generate evidence for and arrive at some kind of impact. And so we ask ourselves these questions. And sometimes young people ask us to say, you know, I do want to make a decision around this pregnancy, and what are the tools that you equip me with? And the council has conducted research to understand what is the young person's journey within the healthcare facility, and how do we ensure that we access services for these young people? And I think a lot of this research is how we are seeing that there are so many new models coming up for service delivery away from the health facility, because maybe the health facility, its infrastructure itself is very intimidating for young people. And so you see there's lots of outreach services, and all those types of innovations are informed by research. We see that there's a lot of services that are provided in centers outside the health facility. You know, it's a youth center, it's a youth space, and there are peer counselors or peer educators who become some kind of buddy, and all that is informed by the kind of research that we have conducted as a council in collaboration with various government departments. It's even just beginning to have these conversations even in schools. We've seen now there's an increase of how do we facilitate the linkage between the learners in schools to the health facilities, and there's no more openness to discuss who's taking on this role. Is it the guidance and counseling teacher in school who's facilitating this linkage? How do we ensure that we equip them with the tools to ensure that young people can access services? So it's really answering the questions, the big what ifs, you know, and designing mechanisms and methodologies for how we can ensure that young people do access services and information.
Okay. Now, with information, and let's speak into climate change and it worsening globally. I would like to just understand on how it connects to population and youth well-being?
So I think climate change, in the way I have seen it and in the work that we have done at the council, I think that the young people in any country or any region bear the brunt of it, because climate-induced shocks, be it floods, be it droughts, impact the general well-being of young people. It impacts whether they will continue in education. It impacts whether they will access healthcare. And some of the research we've done more recently in regions like Southern Province and Eastern Province, where we tried to understand what are the impacts of of drought on young people's health and well-being. I think that as relates to reproductive choices, we saw young people coming back to tell us that and young people, by young here, I'm talking about 20 to 25, would say, my ideal family size was 4, like you said. But now we're dealing with a drought. We're losing animals. We have to walk long distances to access water. My wife can only end at 2. And that is a change in your fertility plans and your fertility desires, which have been impacted by climate change. But we've also seen that young people are forced into child marriage as family coping mechanisms. Your livestock has died, your crop has died, and the family makes a decision that, Vida, you're a young girl who could get married to that very wealthy farmer who could help bring some income to our family, and you will have to leave school to get into that marriage. It also impacts access to health services because you make a decision, you're a young adolescent mother who needs to go for antenatal care, and you have to make a decision between going to look for water or going to a health education class about your pregnancy. When you balance it, what is it that you're going to access and what are you going to go for? So it's really does have this sort of overarching impact on how populations make decisions about things that are very key and critical for them.
Okay. Yeah. Lastly, let's speak on what gives you hope for World Population Day as we close this one off.
Okay, so I think what gives me hope is that Zambia has a very young population. And sometimes people think that is a bad thing. 60% of our population, as at last census, is aged younger than 25. And so this creates an opportunity, a potential for us to really reap the benefits of this. And what we call that in demography is harnessing the demographic dividend. So how do we reap those benefits from this young population? So we need to focus on how do we ensure that we are investing in their education? How do we strengthen maternal health and child health so that when a young person who decided to fall pregnant at the time that they were ready does fall pregnant, they do have access to their accurate health information, but also the health services that see them carry the pregnancy to term, and we do not lose them in that pregnancy. But also, finally, it's really addressing child marriage and how we can ensure that we stop the vice, because it does slow down progress for for this young population. So what gives me hope is I think that Zambia's youth are very resilient. I think that young people are rising to the occasion, that programs are being implemented that increase agency and hope for this population. So I think I'm very hopeful about our capacity to really harness this demographic dividend and ensure that we have growth as a country.
Well, thank you so much for coming through and having this conversation on World Population Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
We were talking to Nachela Chelwa Kawimbe, who is Manager, Monitoring, Evaluation and Implementation, Science, Research and Acting Country Representative for Population Council. We're talking about World Population.